I mean, I'm hoping when this goes live, it should be that brilliant graphic that I've made, and all of our viewers can now see the hours and hours of effort it took to make that wonderful graphic to celebrate our status as Mexico's favourite rugby league podcast. But if I press that, we'll appear instead. So that's good news. Welcome to the program.
On their hats while they were listening?
I don't know. I mean, I hope so. I thought they were very excited because it's been.
Yeah, it was a lot shorter in that picture.
I mean, be glad that I learned how to do graphic design 20 odd years ago before they could do things properly. So never mind. Welcome to the program. It is Monday. It is 5 o'clock. Cracker joke.
Yeah.
So
You're too young.
Not
a cultural reference.
I mean, it's just.
It's great because I'm 40 in a few weeks, a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, but I'm 42.
And I still feel young.
There shouldn't be that big a gap.
I can't believe how old I feel.
Welcome to the programme. Next will be morning squad numbers and things wearing away shirts and alternative shirts and this and that and the other. Where do we want to start? Where do we want to start this week? Because it's been an interesting week on and off the field as ever, but
I think there's two places to start. One is to congratulate Salford on their record crowd for Super League, which I think again is a fantastic effort because they've worked around it just being a game. They've managed. It was Armed Forces Day, and they've got a lot of interest around the fixture, and been repaid handsomely with a number of people that turned up. So well done to them. Quick to jump on the back of clubs that don't attract fans. So. They certainly deserve credit for a record attendance. And then obviously the whole build-up to the Leeds Huddersfield game, which I think again illustrated or highlighted what we do best, and we being the sport of rugby league. I think Sky deserve enormous credit first of all, because the idea of getting the whole of the match themed around the Borough family is one thing. Getting the kids involved in a manner in which not only they were consummate in what they did, people will not appreciate how hard it is to do live television, and they were fantastic. But also to subvert a lot of their normal build-up to allow that to be such a, I don't know, you run out of words, don't you? A heartwarming way of approaching something that is so tragic. I think the other thing, and I'm told it was Brian Carney's idea, was to link up what was happening into the ground on the big screen.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea.
Which was fantastic, because then you've suddenly got 14,500 people that are not only providing the backdrop to it, but invested in it. And it wouldn't have been quite the same if they'd have had the normal pre-match build-up. You could see that something was happening on the pitch, and then you're going, we'll all rush home and watch it on the telly. For you to actually be part of it didn't only mean more, but actually there really was a tidal wave of emotion. Very similar to the game where Rob played his last game and got the band back together. Yeah. It felt the same, and irrespective of what happened after that on the field, and I'm sure we'll talk about that and the implications of it. That half an hour, the way Barry McDermott agreed to be almost the stooge. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Brian Carney was himself brilliant to have the Mickey taken out of him. And the coaches, I think, deserved enormous credit. That was minutes before a big game for both of them. Billed as a mini grand final by Rowan Smith. A lot of pressure on both of them. And yet you could tell they were both parents. They both bought into the fact that they were being interviewed by two people who were very, very special. And that you would hope that if you were ever in that position, the same thing could be afforded to you and your family. And the whole thing just, under the most tragic of circumstances, and the reason why we're doing it was glorious for all the wrong reasons.
Agree. You've summarised it really well. To be honest, there's not much more to add. I just thought it was great. I know Sky get a lot of flack, don't they, and people praise Channel 4, but it was really good to see them do something different, and that's almost an idea that they could replicate again, potentially do it in something in a different scenario. I get that, but by engaging the crowd, I thought your point was really good. It's almost like live theatre, wasn't it?
Yes.
Because they were your live audience, and then you've got an audience at home, but you get the reaction from the live audience. And I thought that worked really well, and the girls were outstanding. It must have been a really proud moment for both Rob and his wife, Lindsay.
I think the other thing that came across, apart from, I don't think there wasn't anybody who didn't have tears in their eyes, was when Rob smiled when the crowd in the middle of the second half got the picture of him on the screen, started chanting his name, and spontaneously he smiled, because we know what difficulties he's going through at the moment. We saw, how exhausted he was at the end of the marathon. Similarly, after the 10k, when the kids pushed him, it really tired him out. But that was spontaneous. That in the situation in life that he's in is the best you could have expected. And again, forget the score. That moment probably was more important than anything else. It's a brilliant reflection on what we can do. And I know that obviously you were at an event on Sunday, which is we're talking completely different, but something that the game can do. And when we do it well, that's why we're the greatest game.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Sunday. How was it? Because we spoke about it last with the concept building up to last week. How was it?
Yeah, it was good. That was the second Pride game I'd been to at Keighley. Guests of Carrie and Ryan, and they put on a really good show. They'd sort of painted the terrace in Pride colours and the trans flag colours, and come in for some inevitable criticism on social media during the week. But look, I think for me, people just get the wrong end of the gist or the stick of it. It was about, there's lots of stands that are named after people. This was just a Pride stand. That doesn't mean you've got to be gay to stand in it or a lesbian to stand in it. Look, please. It was just about celebrating what that club is. It has really, I suppose, put Rugby League on the map for it. It became the first club to do it in professional sport. They had the sports minister there yesterday, Stuart Andrew MP for Pudsey, alongside the local MP Robbie Moore, and it was just a great event, as I think I've said before, from young to old, from straight to gay. Everybody sort of got involved and bought into the spirit of it, and it obviously helps when Keighley go on and then win.
Indeed.
And it was
I'm not sure why, in fact.
True, but I mean, there weren't an awful lot of Whitehaven fans there. There was probably a coach load, but it helped the party atmosphere. The weather, certainly in the first half, did. The second half, it tanked it down. But no, it was. It is a special day, and for somebody who is gay to go to a sporting event and that to be front and centre. And to feel as though everybody's sort of genuinely a part of it, it is really special. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so commend what they do. I know they do come in for some stick, but fair play. I mean, just in terms of Keighley and the club, it was a really interesting conversation. I got talking to Stuart Andrew and to Robbie Moore, and the work that they've been involved with, particularly in Keighley and their relationship with IMG, and not just that, but the new stand. So they've currently got planning application in to demolish the old wooden stand and replace that with a new stand. Keighley, the town, got about £36 million of town deal money, and about £2 million of that is going to that project. So, subject to planning, that will be delivered in the next probably couple of years. So
again, actually, for all of their criticism of what IMG are trying to do, that's the blueprint, isn't it? Be the best you can be, have these criteria you can measure yourself against, and then you've got the opportunity to move forward as a club. So
they were live on Sky Sports News.
I understand their objections initially when we had them on the show, but actually what they're being asked to do is a roadmap for how to sustain the club in the future. I
suppose in many ways they would probably say, well, they were doing that anyway, and they would continue to do that. But you're right that they were live on Sky Sports News yesterday with Stuart Andrew and the local MP talking about an important issue for the club, and again putting Rugby League on the map. For the right reasons, and off the field, they've grown the crowds. They've got the plan in place to produce a new stand, and so that there appears to be progress being made. And I guess that's what if you're a supporter of Keighley and a Rugby League supporter in general, that's what you want to see. Clubs moving forward.
And if that progress supersedes their progress on the field, that's not a bad thing either. Now it's just actually changing the focus and saying it doesn't have to all be about go and spend money you don't have on some Antipodean players who aren't necessarily good enough. It's actually have a plan that's 2, 5, 10 years down the line, and make something that is almost an irresistible case as to why you need to be in Super League, of which the playing factor isn't as significant now as it would have been if it was solely promotion relegation. Actually suit what they're doing.
I mean, interestingly, yesterday before the game they were visibly under pressure.
With the way if they'd have lost that.
Yeah, the way that the season had been going, the results that they'd had today, particularly with the game the week before, having lost away at Newcastle by 2 points. They clearly had felt the pressure. So it was a relief from their point of view to get the win yesterday. But again, that would point to IMG's plan is that it's not all about what you do on field. So if you're doing off-field activity that's moving the game in the right direction, then you should be rewarded. So
I'm not worried about relegation the same way you think you're being denied promotion.
And inevitably, when the Championship with 2 teams going down and them losing 2 points to Newcastle the week before, they've sort of closed that gap. Yeah, absolutely. Swinton winning. That bottom probably 6-7 teams, it's going to be really tight, and each game each week's going to be huge. I mean, Keighley played Bradford away this week, which they beat Bradford at home comfortably, but the way that Bradford have been playing, with the exception of this weekend away at Toulouse, but I think there's yet to be a team go and win in Toulouse. That will be another big test for Keighley to go to Bradford and try and repeat what they did a few weeks ago. So away from what happened on the field, it was just great to be part of an event and to be warmly welcomed by a number of spectators. But it's amazing when you finish how well received you are.
We had a couple of comments on YouTube after the show last week saying that they go to rugby league, to sport, to whatever, to escape from the real world, to escape from politics. Now, I was going to say, well, this is not a political thing, but then MPs there, aren't they? But that's what MPs do. What we've seen though this weekend, and you can say Armed Forces Day, that's a political thing. It's invented by the government. The previous one, the other lot, Friday at Headingley, the Prime Minister pledged £50 million, was it?
20 million still to come.
Everything's politics. I know we all have escapism. It's hard to escape from the real world.
It's impossible
unless you create your own.
It's intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
You can't split them.
It's politics with a small p. It's not a Conservative Labour, and again, people have their own views on MPs, but you just can't separate it. Sport is society, society is sport, and what did we see? A record crowd yesterday at Salford with Armed Forces Day and the event that they put on there. Whether that, was it just because of that event? I don't know, but there's lots of things that we do in rugby league, lots of events that we put on. Game at Batley a few weeks ago where they've got the colostomy game, they've got the issue with Joe Cox and all that. Yeah. There's lots of events, lots of games, so let's not sort of just wave the rainbow flag on this occasion and have a go at somebody for doing that. This is obviously how you can improve the Western Terrace at Headingley, Phil, just painting. Because obviously you can't do anything with it. I mean, you are Leeds, it's all your fault. So all those people moaning about
only
Western
Leeds
Terrace,
when they lose. Nobody's interested when they win.
You just have to put some paint on there. Have it the Pride Terrace.
Memo to Paul Caddick.
Notorious Western Terrace as it was in the cricket days. I miss those days. Rick has been on. Question chats, he says. In fact, he directed this straight to you on Twitter, so you might have read this already. The 6 again rule for ruck offence is surely the most pointless rule for any team in their own half wanting to clear their lines with a kick. Isn't it time to change this rule so it only applies if the benefiting team are in the opponent's half? Discuss.
We've discussed it before, in fairness. I think Rick actually, I don't know if he still is, but he was a match official. It's the same person I'm thinking of. We've discussed it before. I agree with where the NRL's gone with it. I think it's not the half, it's the 40. And I think that's probably working more effectively down under. I think I would be surprised if it doesn't get introduced next season in Super League. So I think I would imagine the coaches would support it too. Although many a team will exploit it as it currently stands. I think it's frustrating for the referees, probably frustrating for the players, and frustrating for the spectators. But as is often the way, when you introduce a law, there are consequences to that, and teams will find a way around to suit their ends. And no doubt in another year or two time somebody will have worked out how to sort of circumvent that system. But I think it will change.
Has anyone seen the economy games this week, or no one cares about that anymore? That was last week.
Media only went to one.
You had a question, Phil?
Apparently the overall number of penalties is coming down.
Oh, what a surprise.
But again, you don't know whether that's because the knowledge of the first few is starting to filter through, or you're dealing with teams who are differently coached or at different levels of their development. the academy is meant to be a proving ground. Clearly, teams like London and Newcastle are at a different level of where their players are to a Leeds or a Bradford, who are, have had their kids in their system for a lot longer and obviously brought up with rugby league in their blood. So yeah, it will even itself out. At the end of the trial, there'll be an analysis. We merely commented on the first game because we actually witnessed it, and it had some good points, and it had some ones that needed addressing, and it had some others that you thought, if the ball's in play a little bit more, there's a little bit more offloads because the tackle isn't as smothering as it used to be. Maybe that element of it needs looking at a bit, but you can't judge it even on what we've had at the moment.
2 weeks now. You've got a question as well, Phil.
I haven't. Brian Wood sent in a question, which, if my phone works...
you can leave comments throughout the week on the video. It helps if you watch the video throughout, because then I get about 3p in YouTube, so that's good. So do watch the video, or just randomly tweet us.
Brian, it says...
that's called filling that, that's professionalism.
Very good.
I mean, James has got a whole agenda. I just got the League Express to see what's
It says podcast. That's the title. I thoroughly enjoy listening to the podcast. I only read that bit out because obviously...
Love the show, Steve.
Yeah, I love the show.
It was interesting listening to James discussing refereeing big matches. I wondered if he would like to comment on the Morgan Smithies incident in last year's cup final. No axe to grind. Keep up the good work, Brian.
Is he a Huddersfield fan?
He's a Leeds fan.
Oh,
I think.
Yeah, I think my memory serves me right. I think he committed 2 high tackles, I think, in that game, didn't he? And in hindsight, he should have gone to the bin. Having said that, I think they charged him with 2 separate Grade B offences, from memory serves me right. And then they also charged Luke Yates with a Grade B high tackle, which, look, it to some extent it's difficult on a major game as to the level you're at in terms of foul play. The way we'd gone last year was after a third of the way we'd been issuing red and yellow cards like they were going out of fashion, and then we backed away from that to some extent because ultimately that's what the public and the players and the clubs wanted, and then it's about trying to find that balance, and probably on that day I got it wrong, on reflection, but that's just the nature of it. At the time I actually didn't think. Yeah, I knew it was a penalty, and I was between penalty and a sin bin, and given the occasion, you've got to be at 100% certain. And I think on the basis it was his second go, I think on that second occasion would have been the occasion when he would have gone to the sin bin.
So if any journalists are watching, there's your headline: top former official admits cup final blunder. There you go, and that's tomorrow's story. That's it done. We need more controversial things on the programme, because that's how it works. Tim Sheen said something on a podcast in Australia, and everyone goes, "Whoa!"
Interesting what he said though.
Yeah. Salford Hull KR
merger.
Devil Robins.
Devil May Care Robins.
But they played at Liverpool.
And Cumbrian Lakes.
Newcastle with the British Bull. Yeah. Josh Griffin. We spoke about him for ages on the programme last week, and caused much debate among Hull fans really, because everyone else was just apart from the people who wanted to be contrarian, say, well, the other fellow, he nearly killed someone, he should have got signed eye ban, but Josh Griffin said some naughty words and got 7 games. Surprised at 7 games?
Yeah, I was to some extent, because I think similar cases in the past have probably not been dealt with as severely. But as we were saying before we started, that Josh Maguire got 7 games for the comments that he'd made. Now, whether they've taken a stronger view this season on that level of dissent, and as we know, as we've read the minutes post our podcast last week, he'd clearly gone through various stages. He'd sort of chunted something which Chris Kendall wasn't able to hear initially, and he ignored that. At which point the penalty was given. Then the half-time hooter goes, he blows the whistle for half-time, he has another go. Chris then decides to bring out the yellow card, and he chooses to continue having a go, at which point he then calls him a cheat, basically. So, as I think we sort of said, there's no surer way to get sent off, and that's to question the integrity of the referee. And it might be the subject of my article in the July issue of the magazine.
Birthday issue, I think.
It's just a hot topic, I suppose, around dissent, and my frustration with it was the reaction by a fairly large number on social media, at him being sent off, and B, at the length of the suspension. But just go back to one point, which is what I made last week, and people still objected to it, was that somebody sort of said, well, if he'd got the decision right, the red card wouldn't have occurred. Well, it's nonsense, is that? You can get a decision correct and the player can still object to the decision because he doesn't like the decision or he believes the decision to be incorrect, but actually it is proven to be correct. So even if you get a decision correct, and I think on that particular decision it's inconclusive either way, even if you get a decision correct, it can still lead to dissent, and it would have ended or could have ended at the point he sin-binned him and he chose to carry on, and in what he said, he's just left himself open to the charge. And obviously the way they've gone this year, they've gone pretty heavy on the charge. Now the next point is that people then complain that, well, hang on a minute, a fella's got landed on his head and he's got 6 matches. Well, they are apples and oranges, but one thing I would say is, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the player now that did it, the league player last week, but when he did it, he immediately put his hand up. He immediately recognised that what he'd done was wrong. Now if you compare that, if we're going to compare to Griffin had one chunter which Chris wasn't able to hear. He then had another go. He was sanctioned for it, and then he chose to have another go. So he's had actually 3 bites of the cherry. The lead player didn't pick that player up and dump him on his head 3 times. No. So if you're talking about, was it intentional?
I think there's 2 issues coming out of this. One about dissent generally in society, but particularly in rugby league. There are a lot of missives flying about at the moment about touchline behaviour in the community game, about responsibilities that parents and coaches have for touchline management and all that kind of thing. I think if Josh Griffin hadn't been sanctioned in the manner in which he had, it's very hard to get that message out at any other level of the game. You know, respect as a policy has to be priority number 1 at the moment. It's a major issue that is affecting a lot of touchlines and is putting people off. So that's one thing, and I think it is related. You know, he as a, I don't like to use, I don't think players necessarily are role models, but their actions and behaviours transfer very quickly onto touchlines and are mimicked by kids. So I think the one thing is that punishment is not just the punishment for that offence, it's the punishment that the game is trying to meter out to say, we don't want any of this, and that's fine by me. I think the other thing is, I don't believe in this whataboutery. It's like you said, it's apples and oranges. You cannot compare cases that are completely different. If you look at Hugo Salabio, who put a player on his head in the Wakefield Leeds game a couple of weeks before, he got 7 matches. Kai O'Donnell gets 6. They are comparable. You can look at those and say, is that a fair punishment for O'Donnell? It probably is. It's in the realms of Salabio actually, you know, he had the ball in his hand. He was lost it, and at the same time he's losing the ball. He's tipping a player. Slightly, probably worse for the player that he's doing it to, because they weren't going into a tackle. They were the, you know, everyone's an innocent party, but clearly they didn't have the ball at the time. So that makes sense if you compare those two. Don't compare a tip tackle with dissent. You know, what will be interesting, I think, is, and we might hear a bit more about, is what we next do about hip drop tackles, because the other thing coming out of the disciplinary today is clearly that James Harrison has got 2 matches for an incident with Nathan Massey, where again Massey a little bit like a previous hip drop tackle that ended the season of Wigan prop forward, whose name I can't remember at the moment. Do we need to be harder on hip drop tackles because they're creeping into the game? So compare that 2-match sanction with...
Absolutely. No, I think you raise a fair point there, because if you look at the consequence of when a tackle can go wrong, then it can end somebody's season. Could end their career in the same way that, you know, you could break somebody's neck with a dangerous spear tackle. So, you know, I get that. So there's an argument there that actually what's his name? James Harrison has actually got lucky to some extent. So you could constantly go on and compare. I mean, one of the comments I also saw was about, the referee should be, he sort of lost his composure at the time when Griffin said what he said and branded this yellow card in in response, which is just nonsense. I mean, imagine if the referee spoke to a player in the same way, and the consequences that would have for a referee. Somehow people expect that referees should be, as calm as ever, which they are. They are generally the calmest people on the field, but there's many a times when a referee would love to say something to a player, but the microphone prevents it. You could carry on forever and a day, but ultimately for me, it's about the potential consequences. If it's been seen to be weak action, that has far more potential impact on the wider game for the recruitment and retention of match officials. And something today that was shared on social media that I saw by a rugby union referee, and the abuse that he'd received recently on social media, directed to him for decisions again on a game. And I just think it's just entirely unacceptable. And is it about time that clubs started to take action? Possibly, yeah. I mean, I know of some instances where the recipients of that abuse have then reported it to the employer of the person that's abusing, and that's faced consequences for them and in their employment, and frankly, so it should.
Well, plenty of people who replied to either the RFL's tweet about the decision or even just to our video last week, who were easily identifiable as human beings and not pretend photos. So, I'm not plugging my thing in. It's easier for clubs to find these people and tell them off, ban them from grounds. But I don't know why clubs don't do that, especially when they are easily identifiable.
I mean, I've had people message me, as I said, directly, where they've got their names attached to it, so it's quite easy to identify who they are.
I'm trying to think who the boxer was that went round and...
Yeah, it was in Sheffield, wasn't it? He confronted someone. I'm on your street, come out. Suddenly backtracked. Yeah.
Was it ever explained to you why... Not the RFL don't make a big song and dance about who's refereeing whose games, but they publicly announce them, and then every media outlet that needs to fill the internet will say, this week James Charlie's going to Wakefield, who he hates, and they never win when he's there. Did they ever explain why they announce them publicly? Because it doesn't seem to do anyone any good.
No, I don't know really. I mean, it's like when I got the grand final in 2017, I just knew what was coming. It was like, nobody's going to say, "Oh, great! Really pleased that James Child's got the grand final."
Well, no one was talking about you in the build-up. By Friday, no one was talking about it, so it was all right.
But you're right. You know what's going to come. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's always seems to be.
There was always some excitement in the olden days where you had to buy a programme to see who the referee was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always the way that they seem to put on tries which it shouldn't have been given because there's some error that's in the build-up, and then there's just an avalanche of comments. You think, maybe it should be checked before it goes on.
Or possibly should do like most clubs are doing with crowds at the moment and not mention it.
Yeah.
I mean, Phil says you should be running the referees department. You don't want a job like that, do you? You've got a proper job. So praise for Leeds and Salford and Keighley for having events and getting crowds
on the other side of that.
On the other side of it, okay.
I would say before you go on,
yes,
on social media, which did make me laugh at the weekend, was Hull KR's response to Chris Kendall when he came out to warm up, and they were all clapping him, which was much to the irritation of the Hull FC fans then on social media. But I once got dropped, and then the game I should have been refereeing was Hull KR, and Steve Ganson took my place. And then as a punishment, I was then sent to touch judge for Steve Ganson on the game that I knew I was supposed to referee. So when I came out to warm up with Steve Ganson, they were all sort of booing. So Steve Ganson then started pointing at me, so all the boos were directed at me. I mean, that's teamship for you, isn't it?
That's teamwork.
Sorry, go on.
Just a couple of things. This weekend, clearly... there was some great stuff that was put online, but I don't understand why the women's nines was on our league, and at the same time the wheelchair inclusivity round in Manchester was on the Sportsman. So you couldn't watch both in their entirety. You either had to flip between them or pick one or the other. But the women's nines were at Salford. There's 7,900 people there. Would they have filled the stadium if the women's nines had kicked off at 10 o'clock at Salford and led into the men's game? This weekend, merely something that Leeds have put out, on Thursday night, the Leeds men's team is travelling to Warrington for a game that's on Sky. At the same time, the Leeds under-16 team is at home on a Thursday night against Wakefield, which doesn't make any sense. The Leeds under-18 team on Saturday is playing Warrington away. So again, why could those two matches not have been one the curtain raised the other? But to make it even worse, on Sunday, the Leeds women's team is away at Warrington, playing at the same venue that the under-18s are. So if you're not going to have a double header between the under-18s and the men's, why do you have a double header with the under-18s and the women?
You're absolutely right. With so many teams, but with so many teams having women's teams and academy teams, then you would think it'd be almost you mirror the fixture list for the season from following on from the men's.
Clubs now will be saying, like we've been praising them for events they're putting on, and saying which fixtures can we put together and make it an even better experience for the fans. If you're an away fan and you're thinking, my son's playing in the under-18s, I'll go early and watch the women. Why do they expect anybody to make 3 trips to Warrington in 3 days?
They're just not going to do it. I mean, it never used to cease to amaze me that when we'd arrive, usually an hour and a half before kick-off, people would the turnstiles would open and people would walk in and there'd be nothing on for an hour and a half. But people would want to get their spot on the terrace and stand there in the freezing cold in February, looking at just the turf. Whereas if you put something on, at least they've got to watch.
But surely, again, the whole idea of IMG, of revamping the sport and
making it an event.
Part of it is we want to talk about the results clearly in the league tables, but we want to say we had a really good time and it was really worth going, and we've now got all this different product that we can put together, and it's like a jigsaw. But you could have less games at home if you put more on those games and more people went.
You're just giving extra reasons for people to go, in the same way that I appreciate I had a free ticket yesterday to go to Keighley, but there were 2 friends of mine that went that would not go normally to watch that game, and they went because it was the Pride game, and there would have been other people that would have done that. So the more reasons you give people to go to an event or to make it into an event.
And it looked like the women's nines was great.
Yeah.
Was the PDRL on Saturday as well?
PDRL at Salford. No, in Manchester, wasn't it? It was at the same time as the wheelchair, I think. And again, it's great that we're doing it. Full credit to everybody for putting them out there. It's great that we're televising them, but why are we being asked to choose between 2 of our own?
Agree, and it's the same with this week's fixtures. Looking at Super League again, there's 4 fixtures on Friday night. Madness.
I do like the idea of Sunday being a traditional rugby league day when it wasn't until the 70s.
Well, another thing as well, 2 French teams, both playing at home at the same time last Saturday. There was an hour's difference between them, but they're 2 big games. Again, is there no way of actually trying to align them in some way that they don't clash with each other? It's
Hull Catalans. Is that on our league this week?
Yes. £6.95.
Which is a shame, because we're now in the middle of summer, of course. I know Wimbledon starts next week. It's the second men's test match starts on Wednesday in the cricket. So there isn't really anything on Saturday apart from...
There's certainly no football on.
No.
So that's why we should be on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Just spreading the fixtures out.
I know we need to make money off our league, so I'm give it away for free.
Salford quite rightly. They're the only game on Sunday. Wonder what that's telling us.
No Super League on Sunday, so no excuses not to go to a game, unless, of course, like me, you're working on Sunday, which that was well planned, wasn't it? Never mind. Before, because you've got to go soon, is there anything else you want?
Oh no, I've still got time. That's fine.
What do you want to talk about next? Because you've got an agenda.
No, it's not an agenda. It was just a reminder of some things.
You've prepared. We haven't.
You've got a running order.
Interesting. I saw on social media about Jared Sammet being supposedly upgraded from a yellow to a red. I don't think that was true. He was just sent off at half time for dissent.
Not another one.
No, and then the Yaha tackle in the whole car game caused quite a bit of consternation on social media again.
If we got rid of social media, I know that's where our audience comes from. So kind of.
I mean, it's difficult because I think the footage isn't the best in terms of being able to determine the contact. So I followed looking at the Alex Walmsley charges for the last couple of weeks. He got charged after the Magic game with the Grade B high tackle. St Helens appealed that, and they got not guilty on the basis that match review panel had a burden of proof which they couldn't demonstrate, and because the point of contact wasn't visible on the footage, and that was with Sky's footage. So St Helens successfully got him off. He wasn't being banned, but it was going to go on to a disciplinary record, which would have affected him in the future. And then, lo and behold, the week after, he then gets charged again with a Grade B high tackle, and this time he gets banned. I think in perhaps not dissimilar circumstances. I mean, the Yaha tackle just looks like a big hit. I'll be honest, but I think when you probably break it down, which is what match review panel will have done today, they will be able to demonstrate, they would argue, shoulder contact, one would imagine, or some contact with the head, and therefore that's why he's being charged. So it will be interesting to see whether Hull KR try and appeal it on the same basis that St Helens did. So we'll see. But ultimately, he got charged with a Grade B and has got fined. So that would suggest that the decision to sin bin him was correct.
I've now remembered I read an article after the Josh Griffin ban, which seemed to insinuate that now was it an independent panel he sat in front of, because it went to tribunal, didn't it?
Yeah, so I was just to clarify for people, the match review panel is completely independent from the RFL. You appreciate they do get paid. They get paid by the RFL, but their decisions are not scrutinised week to week by RFL staff members. They make their decisions independently, as is the disciplinary panel. They don't get paid, but they're there independent. Because
there was the insinuation that because the match review panel would believe Chris Kendall more because he's an RFL employee rather than Josh Griffin is not. And I thought that was a very naughty thing to insinuate.
Well, Josh Chandler's not employed by the RFL, but they believe Josh Chandler's claim against Josh Maguire, so just nonsense.
Not that you're here only to talk about disciplinary issues. So I think one of the things we should discuss before you go is the tenure of Ian Watson. So I think we can talk about the Leeds Huddersfield game, but that was a hot talking point after that game.
They're going to win. They're going to win a comp.
What I would say is a couple of things. One is, when you have the majority of your back line back and players playing in the correct position, particularly your halves, you are a lot better than when you don't have them. So
and
that was one of the reasons why Leeds functioned as a unit a lot better than they had the last time, or the last two times they played. I also think it was quite odd that there was a double header at Headingley, and there was a reserve grade on beforehand game, Huddersfield against Leeds. Huddersfield decided to play, I think, 4 or 5 first team players. Two of them quite notable. Jay Connor was playing, and E Masters, big overseas signing for this year. They won 30-0. Clearly they're not playing against, reserve is a strange level. It's often not like against like, and there were, I think, half of Leeds' team were academy lads that were promoted up, but clearly they were far too good to play at that level, and yet the first team lose 54-0. So you would think that on the balance of the squad that is available to be selected, there's some imbalance there. I thought, and nobody needs to tell Ian Watson afterwards, that Huddersfield's performance arguably was the worst that I've seen this season in Super League, and came from the first Leeds try. All defensive structures, that is something that Ian Watson talks about more than anything else, fell apart. Now, it was a good pass from Cameron Smith, it was a good line from Sam Walters. It wasn't good enough to walk straight through and score a try. And I would also say that measure of emotion that we talked about at the beginning of the game can go one of two ways. It places a huge weight of expectation on Leeds to do something to justify Rob being there and all that kind of thing. If Huddersfield had started in the first 10 minutes and quietened that, then the result could have been very different. Once Leeds had gone ahead, that wave then took them to a 50-point victory. Afterwards, Ian Watson gave an 11-minute press conference, which was very impressive from the point of view that he was honest, he was open, he didn't duck any question. He was clearly asked about what he was going to do in response. He was asked about the speculation regarding Justin Holbrook being sacked the morning before, and how that might impact on Huddersfield having to put out a statement saying how dare you link in with us, and whether there is smoke without fire, or does that make his position even harder. He answered every question brilliantly. If you wanted copy for a newspaper, very hard to decide what to put in your match report, because all of it was good. But then you listen back to it, and everything is I. There's no we, there's no team, there's an insinuation of threat, but it's all about the coach. Now, he might be protecting his players, but I just thought that was a bit odd, bearing in mind that, I don't mind him saying I still think this group can win a competition. It's hard to see it when you've played as abjectly as you have, that you are setting yourself up potentially for a later fall. But I just found it strange that it was all about what I was going to do, and I thought.
Yeah, I've not seen the press conference in full. I saw his interview on Sky post match, which was difficult to listen to and watch, to be honest. But I saw a response on social media about that, which you've just mentioned, which does seem a little bit odd, because I think they are in it collectively. Whether, as you say, he was trying to bear responsibility, but it seemed in the Sky interview he was putting it back on the players. And for me, very early in that game, it had all the hallmarks of a one-sided game, and I thought this could be very embarrassing for Huddersfield, which is what it turned out to be. Because it just looked like the players, I'm not saying they weren't interested, because there were still some try-saving tackles completed in that game, but they just didn't look like they were playing as a unit. They didn't look like they wanted to particularly be there, and that was, for me, more worrying. And I think that the conversation that we're having on Sky at the end of the game between the summarisers, well, how do you change it then? If you're not going to change your coach, how do you change it? Do you keep dropping players? Do you keep bringing players back in, chopping them around? He's already done that a lot. We've talked about a lot this season on the podcast about he doesn't appear to know his best team. You know, Jake Connor, there were comments made in the week before the game, wasn't there, about his fitness, and it insinuated other things as well that we've sort of told him about that he needs to work on.
But again, why would you bring that up halfway through the season? If somebody's got a problem with their fitness, that's something you work on.
Is that because he came back from injury, though?
Yeah.
But is that a legacy from the injury at the start of the year?
But I think it's the injury that he brought to the club.
Who wanted Jake Connor at Huddersfield?
Well, and also, I think it's hard just to blame it on Jake Connor.
I'm not blaming Jake Connor.
I looked at Tuilala here on Friday night, who we were consistently told last year by Ian Watson, possibly over-exaggerating it slightly, but had some fantastic performances at fullback. And we were told by Ian Watson on a regular basis he is the best fullback in the competition. Tuilala here came on as an auxiliary hooker and looked anything other than happy in that role. Not because he didn't do it to the best of his ability, but that's not what he wants to be doing. He wants to be surveying things from the back where he can make his biggest impact, join the line when he's not there to defend in the middle of the field or distribute the ball to people running either side of him. And you just think halfway through the season, how have Huddersfield got to the point where someone who was such a good fit in square pegs and round holes. One of the reasons Leeds played well, they had a lot of round pegs in round holes. David Fusitua coming back on the wing was fantastic. He's a winger, can't play anywhere else really. Austin and Caesar work really well together. They're not fit enough to play together often enough, but Austin dominates a game when Caesar is playing because the organisation role is done by one and the free role is done by the other. Ash Hanley moving to the wing made nearly or over 200 metres. That's what he does. And Richie Myler at fullback gives Leeds a different dimension. When everybody's fit, that's where they play. You get the impression with Huddersfield, when everybody's fit, I don't know where they should be playing.
No, but I mean, Blake Austin got man of the match, but we've seen him have some pretty ordinary games this season, and we've equally seen him play outstandingly well. And that must be frustrating for a coach. How do you get that level of consistency and performance?
Outstandingly well when Aidan Caesar's inside.
And
he played.
We're talking about a team that lost against Wakefield.
Absolutely.
So what was is that the main
games,
difference between the two performances? The fact that everyone was in the right position in one game, and I'm not saying that Wakefield wouldn't have won.
But I think
I don't want to blame that on.
No, I think that's important, but I don't think that's the only. I think it's what you do with you. They had a week off, and clearly Ian Watson was saying he hadn't seen anything that was telling him this performance was coming. That they trained really well. I think some clubs use that as a reset. You could tell that Leeds had, really helped by the fact that they had some star players back. Huddersfield looked like they got worse with the time off. Only they could answer what they did in that time. But it looked contrasting.
They feel like they need to hit the reset button, because if the club is not going to make a change with the coach, and I'm not suggesting they should, by the way.
No.
But if that's not the way that they're going to go, because that sometimes can have a short-term fix, but doesn't often fix the long-term problem. They feel like they need to hit the reset button and have very honest conversations amongst that squad about what's not occurring, what they need to improve on, and actually just try and take a bit of pressure off themselves, because no disrespect, but they've got a safety net at the moment of what they're 6 points ahead. No, 8 points ahead of Wakefield at bottom, who are still struggling. They scored 12 points this week, but they're still struggling to score sufficient points. Without Wakefield being there, there will be huge pressure. Yeah. And actually, if they just take a step back and say, look, we're not where we wanted to be at this stage, but they've got the flexibility to just try and go back to basics and work on trying to improve their performance. Who do they play this week? Wigan away, which is not going to be easy. But,
and then they've got Catalan away, so they've got two very difficult games.
But to some extent, does it relieve a little bit of pressure because they're not expected to go into that game potentially and win?
What's going to be interesting is the 21 when it's announced, because you cannot make threats and then not carry them out. But also, every time you're putting Jake Connor and Isan Masters into the reserves, you've got some rebuilding to do. Then you're going to drop another couple of people maybe this week. I don't know who it will be. That's down to the club. At some point, you're going to need those players. It's going to be really hard.
It's very difficult. It's a difficult balancing act to drop people as well. Yeah. The same goes for referees, because there was a criticism when Stuart was in charge that we had 6 referees, 6 games in Super League, and nobody ever got dropped. People still think that referees don't get dropped. That's not the case. I mean, the group of referees this year has been pretty consistent in terms of their appointments, but in previous seasons they've chopped and changed almost weekly. But that's a difficult balancing act for a coach to try and manage that group, because you're gonna irritate somebody if they feel that them being dropped is unjustified. If they buy into why they're no longer in the team, then that's fine. But that's part of the art of coaching, isn't it? But I just think the players have got to look at themselves as well. It's not just the coach. They've got their own standards and expectations that when they take to the field.
And I also think that sometimes there is undue pressure by a coach, which may be intentional to get the best out of a player. When you see the result, you might think it's backfired. But Ollie Russell coming back into the team, suddenly there's a huge amount of pressure put on him by his coach, saying that's going to be the difference. He's going to turn it around. I'm so glad he's back. And you're going, well, he's coming back from an injury, and the one thing that we all know is that it takes time to come back from an injury, particularly to play at the very elite level. Same with Theo Farge. He's clearly a wonderful player. His career is littered with great moments, but he's coming back from a really serious injury. It's going to take him a while. But if the coach is then saying, Theo's back in the team, so everything will be fine, it's undue pressure.
Yeah, it's not an easy one to answer, is it? They've got to break their next games down into looking at performance indicators as opposed to looking at the result, because, as I say, they've got that cushion at the moment, and break the game down into 5 and 10 minute chunks almost, or set after set after set. I know that's boring, and it's probably going back to this process of they're going back to sticking at the process. But
before we give you a yellow card, because you've got to go, Justin Holbrook is now on the market. As an owner of a club that you think might be underperforming, do you start finding his phone book and making contact?
Well, Widnes are looking for a new coach, aren't they? So I'm sure Justin Holbrook doesn't want to go back to.
Does it change that dynamic that somebody who is a proven winner in this competition, who desperately now needs to reprove himself, probably isn't going to get another head coaching job in the NRL for the foreseeable future, might want to come back here, prove the Gold Coast Titans wrong?
Possibly, who knows? I mean, with a club like Huddersfield that have got money, possibly it does change things, but you can't make decisions based on the availability of somebody. You've got to make a decision that's right for the club, and if a coach is not right for a club, or if a certain player is not right for a club, then it's a bigger picture, isn't it? That they've got to make those brave decisions.
Yeah, and I guess you've got to either take the whole route and say we've brought in Tony Smith to do a specific job, it's over a length of time, we've got players coming in and out of contract, we're going to leave him the space to do whatever he needs to do. You lose 7 games, you go, but we're not deviating from this track.
But I think
do you suddenly say at this point it's not good enough, the players that we've got in house are better than we're playing, therefore we can change?
And if you're going to make a change, you have to make a change, I would say, now, because the players are available for signing. As we've seen, we've got Cruz Leeman signing 4-year contract at Wigan next year. Sam Walters,
Jackie Chan.
O'Connor's just signed a 3-year deal at Leeds, etc. These players are now being tied up. So if you don't change your coach at this stage and bring somebody else new to shape his squad for next year, you end up in a situation whereby, a little bit like Darryl Powell had last year, you end up with a squad that's not yours, that you've suddenly got to turn around, which I would imagine is more challenging than trying to make changes now or plan changes for next season.
And if you bring in somebody now that can work with the group under no pressure of if you make the playoffs, great. If you don't, we've had such a bad season so far. It doesn't. But then you've got them all pre-season as well.
Yeah, I mean, the reverse argument to that would be, I would say, well, you brought Ian Watson in for given reasons.
Yes.
What suddenly really has changed to make him a supposed bad coach? He's not a bad coach.
No, he got them to a
results are not going his way.
Yeah.
We talked also before about them being a number of tight games early on in the season, and actually, if they'd converted 2 or 3 of those games, actually they're like on the cusp of the playoffs. So 2 or 3 games, the results of those can significantly change the view. And without jumping topic again, Warrington are supposedly in crisis, but are still second in the table.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to be in crisis second in the table.
As I said, Leeds lost to Wakefield in their last game, and then put 54 points against
Wakefield.
Wakefield. So look, things can change very, very quickly in a week, and I think if I didn't particularly get Huddersfield's statement, by the way, in response. I thought that was just odd.
Yeah.
Almost better to just not make any
comments.
Just ignore it. Yeah. So, I think keep things in-house, keep the conversations open and honest in-house, and work week to week, which is dead boring, isn't it? But that's ultimately how you turn things around.
It was a very un-Ian Watson-like performance.
Yeah.
Now all I'm thinking about is getting some Subbuteo stands for the pitch and then painting them of their own price. But they are expensive. So
I've got some.
We'll have objectors outside on the pavement on the street lane.
We've already got a dog on we've got a pink dog on the pitch. I don't know what's going on. You'll be back with us next week, James, won't you?
I shall. Yeah.
Good, because at least I'll remember what we're talking about, because you tell me before we start.
Am I being sent off at half time?
No, I think sin-binned. And then
but if you call us a cheat, then
I'm going to call you a cheat on the way out.
No, because we bought the.
Oh yeah, bought Mars Bar ice creams. Yeah, well,
you can do whatever you like.
Not sponsored by Mars Bar. Oh dear! Take your camera away for James.
Oh yeah, you might need that for the journey.
Thank you.
Huddersfield. They're a strange fruits, aren't they? I don't know.
And again, things like social media depends on who you follow, gives you an impression of certain things. But I think we both follow a lot of rugby league people in general, and I didn't see as much protest as you would with certain other clubs. Now, again, I don't know what that says. What I think is you want to see progression. So from where they were last year, finishing third and getting to a cup final, going out and making some significant signings, which it now looks as though they haven't particularly covered Danny Levy's exit as well as they may have done. They went back to Nathan Peets, who clearly knows the Ian Watson way, but the only Huddersfield fans that I saw on social media were saying, Levy's a huge loss. But the squad of players is actually overall improved from last year. A lot of media people had them higher up the league, challenging perhaps for a grand final, breaking this monopoly. To be 10th out the cup and over half the season gone and having lost by, well, in a manner in which is very un-Huddersfield-like over the last 2 or 3 years, I think that's where people start questioning things, and are right to do so. And Ian Watson said, I'm right to be scrutinised.
Like Rowan Smith getting to the grand final, they overachieved. Not necessarily overachieved, but the expectations are higher because of where they were last year. But they shouldn't be 10th in the table.
Do you embrace that because they were 5 minutes away from winning the Challenge Cup? That's not over exceeding expectations. They were good enough to be 5 minutes away from winning the Challenge Cup. You look to build on that. I get third. That would have been great to finish third, but there were playoff contenders this year. The likelihood is, looking at the league table now, and Ian Watson said it himself, we cannot look at where we're going to finish, we can only look at the next game. Logic says, because of that log jam in the table, they're not going to make the playoffs. They would have to win virtually every game. and they're probably not going to.
Huddersfield Town, when they were in trouble, they brought in Neil Warnock, and the Neil Warnock of Rugby League is in front of me. He's John Kear. It's his book. Have you got some copies of it? Can you buy this in the shop?
No, that's I think the last one.
The last one?
Good book. He could go here. It's our guest.
John. It's going to fall over. He's been let go by Widnes, who were beaten by Swinton yesterday. Great result for Swinton. That bottom of the Championship. I mean, the bottom of Super League's irrelevant because we know what's going to happen there. But the bottom of the Championship, you've got Newcastle on 5 points. You would assume that they probably are in bother because they are 5 points behind Swinton and York. And York have got a massive game on Wednesday going to Whitehaven, haven't they? And then they've got to play again on Sunday against Halifax. So York have got a massive week. Barrow on 11, Whitehaven on 12, as mentioned. Whitehaven playing York on Wednesday. Keighley on 12 now after that win. And that James was at on Sunday. And just above them, London and Widnes. Now, Widnes are 5 points outside the playoffs, but 4 points outside the relegation zone. I don't think they're going to get relegated. But what do I know? I've not seen much Championship rugby this season. But obviously, they've made the decision that now's the time for a coach they brought in to steady things, to get rid of him, to shake things up again, I guess.
I think it was James Gordon on social media, who is a follower of Widnes, commentates on their games, said that this will now be the 7th season in succession that Widnes have ended it with a different coach. And you would look at that and say, is that the issue? Which is not to point the finger at the people that run the club now. Is the issue that unless there is some kind of stability, and it's back to the discussion we've just had about Ian Watson, a view of where you want to be and how you want to get there, and somebody is given the time to undertake that, you're always going to be just changing your coach and as a club not moving forward. I'm not sure what a club like Widnes at the moment expects, where they think they should be in the pyramid, why John Kear going solves a long-standing problem, who they turn to next. I genuinely don't know. It came as a shock to me when I saw that, because obviously we're big fans of John. I think the job that he's done in the sport is amazing. I think wherever he's gone, he's invariably left the team in a better place than they were when he arrived. He is, as you say, a bit of a troubleshooter. Can still clearly do a job. I think felt that he was prematurely ousted from his position at Bradford when they were undergoing similar turmoil and change.
I always get the perspective from supporters, and obviously I am a supporter of a club he used to coach, that when it's not going well, when you're not winning every week, it's easy to criticise his style of play because it's pragmatic. It's not expansive. It is what it is. But when it gets results, it's fine because you're not bothered. But when it doesn't get results, then But he'll be back somewhere because somewhere else will need that firefighting. I don't know where. It'll be. I'm surprised. I've looked on the Wakefield Facebook groups yet. I'm sure they're all saying, "I'll come back as director of rugby" and all that kind of thing.
Well, of course, James Ford hasn't yet been replaced, has he? So
I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be the worst idea, would it, to have him as a
it may even help Mark Applegarth and somebody who I suspect that the pair will have worked together when Mark was working on the academy area. John would have been the coach there, so it's not that as if they're unknown to each other. It might be a good fit.
You don't want to. You just look at the league table in whichever division, and you go, "Oh well, if they lose this game and they lose that game, and then you can see John Kear turning up at another club." But he'll be on the telly at least next time that when the Challenge Cup semi-finals roll around.
Talking good sense.
He does talk good sense. I didn't break it. Not like that chair at Castle, but I brought that time. No one else has been sacked this week, have they?
Not yet. Not as we speak. Quickly checks phone. Alert.
It's been a
transfers are starting to filter.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about these is they all obviously come out in the press, in the media, on social media, and whatever. The players and clubs must know months in advance who's going, who's staying, who's not. So Sam Walter's today being announced at Wigan, for example. Everyone will have known that weeks ago, whatever, and it's not a surprise to anyone involved in those clubs, and everyone just gets on with it.
No, and I think there is a cut-off date of May the 1st. After that time, you know whether you're being offered a contract or not. You also know what level of contract you are being offered. You know what other offers are out there in the market. So much of this work has already been done. It's just that it's when the clubs decide to. Wigan have obviously decided that today they will announce 3 of the people that they knew they'd already signed. Cruz Lehman is a really interesting one. I don't know whether that means the end of Cade Cust at Wigan, whose contract is up for renewal. It'd be very interesting to see who was the first choice hooker between Sam Powell and Cruz Lehman, bearing in mind that one of the issues Cruz likes is a degree of assurance that he'll have a certain influence over the team he plays for with the amount of game time that he plays. I think Sam Walters again has different values to different clubs, and clubs are also trying to put their own jigsaws together under a salary cap sport of, if we re-sign Jared O'Connor, if we re-sign Ash Handley, if we re-sign Jack Sinfield, if we re-sign Sam Lissoni, Sam Walters is worth a certain amount of money to us within our structure. If Wigan say we need a young strapping second row and he's worth more than that in our structure, and we're losing a Kai Pearce-Paul, you can see why players move, and you cannot blame the player. In some respects, it's hard to blame the club as well. But no, there'll be more movement that comes out. I think I was listening to Catalan and Lee on French radio, which is a great listen. You don't need to speak French. If the commentator goes high, Catalan have scored. If he goes low, the opposition scored. But it's great. And Bruno, who is a friend of ours whenever we see him, does a great job not only reporting for the local paper but does all the radio as well. He mentioned on his broadcast that Mikhail Gudamond was headed to Leeds, so presumably they've decided to invest that money in him and not retain Sam Walters. It's going to happen at every club.
Yeah, there's no drama. It happens every year. Everyone gets overexcited about players leaving, and then when the new players come in and they're as good as the players have left or better, and everyone's going,
and highly paid NRL players are not going to be coming over here, no matter how often they're linked with.
Well, they're all going to play rugby union because Eddie Jones has said so. They're all off to the rugby union.
If they're a first choice starter on a very big contract in the NRL, they are not going to be coming here. They may be linked with here, but they're not coming. Luke Brooks was never coming.
I think these things get made up. It's like Ruben Wiki was coming to Wakefield for years. He never came. Leeds Rhinos winning everything. We'll go back to the rest of the men's Super League in a bit, but Wheelchair Super League in Manchester, London 38, Wigan 30, London second in the table. It was very entertaining, wasn't it?
Play Leeds next as well. That's really significant.
Is that at the next Magic, or is that in?
It's in 2 weeks' time.
To work that out.
But the next Magic's at Medway anyway. So.
Yeah, but it's good to have, much like York in the women's game, it's good to have a team that is not a traditional team at the top end of the men's Super League challenging for honours. It just makes things a bit different.
Yeah.
Whereas London, obviously I support London. So
and London, which is significant for the sport.
Hull beat Warrington, 60 points to 24. I saw Martin Norris tweet yesterday, obviously just moved to Hull from Wigan, that he's involved in the Armed Forces wheelchair. So another element to the sport which is obviously going to be big going forward.
Really significant.
So that's good to see that. And
he was brilliant.
Big signing for Hull. And again, if Hull's got that facility at the university where we had the cup final last year. I think the group and the cup's there again this year. I think so. Again, it's a growing thing, and in the grand final rematch, if you didn't see this, it's worth catching the highlights because this Leeds and Halifax rivalry, there is some needle there. Some needle, more than the Isle of Wight. I think it's really, which is a bit of a torturous metaphor, but there you go.
The thing about that is, instead of trying to, clearly there's a line you can't go over if the spats break out between the respective teams. It has to still be respectful and done in the right spirit. But there is clearly some genuine animosity between the teams. That it's a rivalry that is built up over a number of issues. And my take on it would be, let it go. It's brilliant for the sport. We want narratives, we want stories, we want to. Nathan Mulhall has moved from Halifax to Leeds. He's involved in the latest, here's what I think about Halifax because we've beaten them. Brilliant. Let's just build up these rivalries.
And it was a great match. 34-28 to Leeds.
24-0 to Leeds early on. Halifax came back to 28-24. Looked like they were going to win it. They had a lot of momentum with them, and some bloke called Halliwell and another guy called Collins. I think they ensured that Leeds. It was a fantastic game.
I think I've said Nathan Collins is my favourite player. I think I've said that. I shouldn't say that, should I? Because I support London. I should pick someone from London.
Lewis King is your favourite.
We've spoken to him. He's been on a couple of times. Next time, say it all the time. There's no point me saying it because you know it already. But next time there's some wheelchair games, then you go watch it. If not, just watch it on the screens because it is the perfect television sport because of how big the pitch is and the hits and the sound and people bashing into each other. The only thing that's better about being there live is laughing at people reacting to the hits and thinking someone's going to have their leg fall off or something, which does tend to happen when people are watching it for the first time. Up at 8th of July, venue Leeds Rhinos, it says. So wherever that is,
it'll be Leeds Beckett.
No,
it might be Leeds University. I think they're playing their home games at Leeds University.
Well, I might have to pop along to that one then, he says. Don't think I'm working that list. That's a positive. Speaking of the Leeds Rhinos, you may have heard of them. They won the Nines silverware. Well, not silverware, glassware, kind of.
The women's
big paperweight.
Yes.
Big paperweight. I got to see Zoe Hornby's back. She's good.
She played very well.
And again, well done Wigan for getting to the semi-finals and indeed the final, knocking out York in the semis, the defending champions. So 21-8 to Leeds. Well done Leeds. You've won a trophy.
Looked like a good day.
Yeah, as you say earlier, it's a shame it was on at the same time as the wheelchair. So you can't really concentrate on both. And again, it's whether you, like you said earlier as well, if you have it before the Salford game, that might be I don't know what you do with it, but it's obviously a good thing. It's a bit of a proof of concept thing, isn't it? That a Nines event works. It's just how you use that elsewhere. Like having 2 women's Origin games and then deciding it by aggregate. No,
to be fair, they've moved from 1 to 2. They were by 2025 they will have moved from 2 to 3. And I do think there is something about building and making sure that you're not distilling the product by playing it too often. And State of Origin for the men started with 1 game. It was the 3rd game of the series, but it was State of Origin for just one of those games. And look at it now.
I can't believe Leeds have signed another player from Huddersfield Women as well. Shocking.
You wondered where she'd gone.
Well, you could have told me.
I didn't know.
You know everything. How was the Hall of Fame, by the way?
Poignant.
Yeah.
Poignant because clearly one of its members passed away on Friday before, the great Bev Risman. There's a great atmosphere in the room. It's wonderful to be able to tell the story. I think for me the nicest thing is that the whole of the first team squad are there and the staff, and extremely attentive. They want to know the history of the club they play for. They want to look at some of the players that are coming up on stage who may be frail old men as they see them, but suddenly hear about their deeds and might play in the same position, and it means a lot. David Ward, one of the greatest, most vociferous captains Leeds have had, was sat on the table with 3 young players. Jared O'Connor was one of them, who's just re-signed for another 3 years with the club, and David Ward over lunch is telling them some of his stories and what it means to him to have played for the club and instilling in them, if you like, the ethics and values. For me, it's a very important celebration, and it's equally important that the spread of people who are inducted tells the story. So you do go from Jim Bacon, who was the captain 100 years ago when they won the cup, to Keith Senior, who everybody saw play and think, brilliant.
I remember him,
Big Keith.
Yeah.
Brilliant for me.
Tell us about Bev Risman. Well, for those who don't know anything about him whatsoever.
Bev obviously came from a dynastic family. The name that is resonant with everything that's good in rugby league. His father Gus played for 25 years, then went on and coached, and the game in Cumbria, where they lived, was professional sides were around the Risman family, particularly Gus coaching Workington. Bev then obviously had a lot to live up to. Played rugby union to start with, played for England, went on a British Lions tour. Clearly had a rugby league skills, so was very coveted. Lee signed him in the early 60s. Played him predominantly at standoff. It was brought to Leeds in 66 by Roy Francis, just as limited tackles were coming in, and Roy had a group of very young backs in particular, one of whom, Barry Seaborn, was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he needed an old head. Decided he would play Bev at fullback so that he could have the panoramic view of all these kids and organise them. And Bev always used to joke, because of some of the people in the team, like Mick Shoebottom, never had to make a tackle in his life, which of course is not true. A brilliant goal kicker. Found a new lease of life at Leeds in that fullback role, played in the Water Splash final, became captain of the Great Britain team that played in the 1968 World Cup, which was quite ironic because on the tour was Mick Clark, who was actually the captain at Leeds, but Bev was deemed to be the right guy to have in a touring environment. 1969, Leeds won the championship for the second time. Bev played in that game, really bruising encounter, set up the winning try with a wonderful kick over the defence for John Atkinson to chase, but had a terrible knee injury that ended his career slightly prematurely. But one of the reasons he was not happy but was prepared to stand down was because some kid called John Holmes was coming up through the ranks and took his spot. But it didn't end there for Bev. That was the end of his playing career. He fully understood the concept of development, so he was involved with Fulham when they first started. He even coached them for a year, director at London Broncos, first development officer for the RFL in the south of England, massive in student rugby league, really important in the formation of that and helping put that on, president of the RFL, an ambassador for the sport, Buckingham Palace garden parties, all that kind of thing. Absolutely fantastic guy. Quiet, unassuming. When you think that all of the things he'd seen and who his dad was, such a legendary figure, you would never have guessed any of that when you just got him in conversation. Was involved in a West End play called The Changing Room, which David Storey wrote, putting that on. Everything about him bled rugby league. His brother John also had that idea of development. He was coach of. He played professionally for Carlisle, but coach of Scotland and Serbia. So yeah, a fabulous family, a wonderful member of it. It's going to be a really sad miss for rugby league. 85, left a tremendous legacy. Very, very classy player.
So I enjoy these things when you're able to wax lyrical about these people. It's a sad.
It means I'm old.
It's sad that we have to do them in the circumstances, but it's always good to hear about people who we stand on the shoulders of as whatever we are today. So Leeds won. We know that they beat Huddersfield 54-0. Hull Carbeck Wakefield 28-12. Don't even say. Luke Gale played and scored
and threw an interception. The only thing about that is, and I get, we have to credit Hull KR. They're going through a bit of an injury crisis. They played in the cup in a really bruising game. Wakefield had a week off. Wakefield coming off this
morale boosting win.
Well, a win that was going to turn the season around. I get all of that, all the right things to say. The trouble is, if you then lose the next game, the 2 points you gained against Leeds are no more valuable.
No, and not helped by the fact that the team just above them in the table, they won again.
Yes.
Doing Darryl Powell. Castleford 23, Warrington 14. 14 left at half time as well at the.
Apparently Cass given a standing ovation when they came off at half time. Gareth Wood up again against his old club, playing really well. Warrington getting it back to 14 all, and you would have thought then perhaps momentum with them, if such a concept exists. And as Darryl Powell admitted, falling away when it really mattered towards the end of the game. Didn't have George Williams, Didn't have Josh Drinkwater, now won't have James Harrison. So, yeah, Warrington in a little bit of a hole at the moment. But as we said when James was here, I think they seem to be second in the league.
Yeah, and you would fancy their chances this week, wouldn't you? As they, they take on Leeds. So Leeds are back. I forgot that. But that's a fascinating game on Thursday because obviously you've got the pressure of Warrington now useless and in second in the table. Leeds have had that big result. Everyone says it now, consistently inconsistent. Everyone says it about everything.
Well, yeah, and the first game of the season, in fact, the match that opened the season was Warrington against Leeds at the Halliwell Jones Stadium, and that was Warrington's initial statement game, where they said, forget about 2022, this is the new Warrington, and they absolutely thrashed Leeds. So it will be interesting on Thursday.
Catalan's Lee sounded exciting. 38 points to 30.
Catalan 20-0 up, running away with it. Lee then taking the lead, and Catalan just having enough fortitude to win it late on. Lee only naming 18 players because they had some suspensions. But going out there and making, again, a bonding few days of it. They've got something this year, Lee. And full credit to Derek Beaumont, who I know, he's Marmite, isn't he? Sometimes he says stuff that you think, that's great, why can't everybody take a leaf out of his? But other times you're going, not sure you should be on the social media, Derek. He was honest enough to say that he'd had such a great time, and again, nearly 10,000 people there. It was Catalonian Heritage Weekend, and he was saying he's revised his opinion about what the French teams bring to Super League. So, full credit to him for that.
Did Bernard Gouache give him some free meat or something? I was going to say wine.
He said, if you don't, I'm going to strap you to this bull.
Oh, not the ball again. Wigan beat Salford. Wigan, another inconsistently consistent team, beat Salford.
Good result for them.
Very good result.
And again, a couple of weeks now where Salford wobbled a little bit. Be interesting to see how Paul Rowley rallies. Again, some depleted troops, but I suspect Salford are probably again ahead of where maybe we saw them. What would hurt them is not being on the road to Wembley still.
That's the problem for Huddersfield, isn't it? Is the fact that Lee and Salford are perhaps where you wouldn't have expected them to be, and Huddersfield are not where they were expected them to be. Which, of course, the Salford fans, although they lost on today, they can all still laugh at Ian Watson's defeat on Friday, so because they're really bitter about that. Ian Boldsworth has just tuned in, just in time for Hull 34 even, St Helens 6. Another indicative result of how inconsistent everyone in the middle of the table seems to be at the moment. I mean, after the game in the Cup last week, take out the Griffin incident and everything, I don't think you'd have seen that result coming on Thursday. Not necessarily, or not 22-0 at half time.
I think this is the performance of the weekend. Absolutely sensational. And in some respects, the genius of Tony Smith. Because straight after that Cup defeat, he said, there'll be changes. I'll bring some players in. He freshened up his squad in that 5-day turnaround. Gave some people the opportunity to prove that they deserve to be in there when the next team is picked, but also rested some of his guys for later on in the season. Saints looked jaded to me. Probably didn't change their squad enough, but had one of those collective performances whereby as soon as Hull started to get on top, nothing that St Helens could do about it. Jack Wellsby, who'd been so important in winning them the cup tie, looked tired at the back, made a couple of mistakes, not least kicking a ball dead when he should have done, but full credit to Darnell McIntosh, who I think probably had his best game in a Hull shirt for keeping the ball in play. Jake Truman, Jake Clifford back, massive for Hull. But just, why do we love sport? Because everything that we're told before we go to a game doesn't happen when we go and see it, because sport can do that. And Hull were magnificent. Every aspect of their game was completely spot on. And even afterwards, Tony wasn't making a big deal about it, because the inner satisfaction of knowing that he's got a group of players, irrespective of who he picks, that will play for him, was fantastic.
Hull are back.
They were just great.
Well, as you said earlier, they knew what this season was going to be. They haven't deviated from whatever the plan is, and you'd imagine they would reap those rewards eventually.
Yeah, they will. No, they absolutely will. And I know they're losing Chris Sartai, who was massive for them again. Be interesting because they're playing Catalan this week. It'll, Sartai against his new employer. But no, I think there's sometimes you can watch a team play and you know that however long they're going to play for, it's just not going to be their night. Knocking on at the play the ball or getting upset when a pass goes beyond someone. T. Ritson getting caught.
Very fast, that fella. Not fast enough though this week.
All of those things, it's not cumulatively as it starts to move away. You score and then you concede in the next set. It's not your night, but you have to credit the opposition for that 5-day switch. And I think it was vindication of what Tony's trying to do at Hull.
It's David Fafita's birthday on Wednesday, apparently. Happy birthday, David.
Excellent.
And also, the Readers Polling League Express this week. Who is the best referee in Super League?
James Shard.
There's none of the above. You can't vote for none of the above. They're all crap. Ian says, have you ever gone back to Hull twice in 1 week and been in the mood to bother? That's a bit harsh, isn't it? They've got culture there. They've got white telephone boxes, Hull Truck Theatre.
Marina.
The Deep. Yeah, Viking Radio, is that still going? I don't think it is. Radio Humberside still going. Humber Bridge. Hull KR. Who's the famous Hull people?
The Road to Britain. Clive Sullivan Way.
Clive Sullivan Way. There must be some famous people from the slavery fella, the anti-slavery fella.
William, yes.
Yeah, him. Boatstone.
Paul Heaton.
Rotterdam. Rotterdam. There you go. Yeah, the beautiful South. House Martins. No, I'm stuck.
There's a nice ice cream shop in Beverley.
Oh, there you go. There are times
Fish and chips is good.
When we've been to matches where I will just spend looking on Wikipedia looking for famous people so I can do the thing at the end of the match. But off the top of my head, there you go. All the famous Hull people. Not
Judi Dench.
I thought she was York. Is it like it's like Leeds claims Henry Moore and that, doesn't it? He's from Castleford, but he's close. He's in the sphere. Leeds, city of culture. What's going on with that? Being past what's that pub on the Three Legs? That's culture for you. Paul Heaton isn't from Hull, is he? He's from Sheffield, isn't he?
Oh,
but
the house mart. What was it? Hull 4 London.
Yeah. Rick Astley, maybe we should get him out again. Maybe because he's from Newton the Willows. Derek Bowman should be on the phone. Get him there doing the Smiths covers.
AC/DC classics.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need Rick Astley at the grand final or the Challenge Cup final. We ain't got enough time at the Challenge Cup final. We've got too many games to fit in. In the Championship this week, Batley lost. So I mean, what's going on there? Lingard out. 20 points to 18 against London. Halifax beat Barrow 40.
Good result for London, though. Great result.
Very good result for London.
And I think that's the first time I've heard Craig Lingard critical of his team because spirit is what's got them to where they are, and I think he felt that they disrespected London when they saw the team sheet that they had a few players missing. But it's building up to make the 1895 really interesting because they could play each other in the final.
Which would be great, wouldn't it? Halifax 48, Barrow 20, Keighley 28, Whitehaven 18, which we spoke about earlier. Sheffield, James Charles on the chat now. Sheffield 40, Newcastle 0. Nearly 900 there on a Friday night, which is not bad. I say it's not bad. I don't know. Is that good? It seems good. Toulouse 52, Brentford 14.
Big result for Toulouse, who are almost impossible to beat at home. But that, Bradford coming off 5 games unbeaten run. I'm not sure they saw the magnitude of that defeat coming.
Have Toulouse now become Catalans in that they win at home but not away? Is that their new? Because that's obviously the thing we say about Catalans all the time. Is
back up to second now to lose.
Level on points with the Eagles and the Bulldogs. Widnes 18, Swinton 25, of course, which is the result that did for
Martin Kellner. Your boys got another victory.
So if we did Swinton, it'd just be Martin Kellner. That's it. And his brother. And is that it?
Simon.
Is that all the Kellners?
No, there's a sister. But I don't think she's a Swinton fan.
No. Is that all the people from Swinton? I mean,
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if there's any. Is there any more famous people from Swinton? And York 8, Featherstone 24. Featherstone continue their. I mean, the interesting thing for them now is, isn't it? They're not going to finish off top of the table, but they've got to win the whatever we're calling the end of season big game.
Mark Carella back though, so that's big for them because I think he gives them a different dimension from fullback.
This week in the Championship, it is Toulouse versus Widnes on Saturday. Of course, Whitehaven York on Wednesday. And on Sunday, Barrow Batley, which is obviously a big game for both ends of the table again. Bradford Keighley, London Newcastle, Swinton Sheffield, Whitehaven Fev, and York versus Halifax. A big week for York and Whitehaven. Although you obviously would expect Whitehaven not to beat Featherstone on Sunday.
York Halifax, which could be the 1895 Cup final.
A preview of them this week. In League One, Dewsbury 20, Oldham 8. Paul Sykes 1,000 points for the Rams, and to say he's been at Wakefield and London and Bradford for long periods of his career, he's got 1,000 points at one club. Amazing.
41 years old.
No, that he'll be in their Hall of Fame one day, one would assume, at Dewsbury. Still knocking them over. North Wales 20, Hunslet 30. Big win for Hunslet. They played at Chester. I think they're playing their next few games at Chester for the foreseeable future, at least anyway.
Yep. And
Workington 16, Midlands Hurricanes 10. So a big win for Workington at home. There's a little bit of a gap, isn't it, between Workington and North Wales and Rochdale in that mid-table.
But the race for the final playoff place is going to be interesting. And
the bottom of the table is, as you probably expect, with Cornwall and the Scholars there, neither of which played this week. This week in League One, it is Hunslet Doncaster, which is obviously a big game because that's 4th versus 2nd. Midlands Dewsbury and North Wales versus Rochdale Hornets, which is another massive game. And Oldham versus Workington, which is another big game. So all big games in League One. We should just watch League One instead. Super League on Thursday, Warrington Leeds as mentioned. Friday, 4 games. Lee Hull KR, which will be very interesting on the telly. Lee obviously looking to bounce back from their game at Cathlands, which they wouldn't have expected to win anyway. But Hull KR off the back of the win against Wakefield, but still with players missing and such. Saints Cass don't win at St Helens, apart from that time that they did, and ruin that record.
Is that the Tom Maguire derby?
It is. It must be, wasn't it? The winners get to keep talking. Wakefield versus Salford. Should I go on Friday? And Wigan versus Huddersfield.
I do think that is a big test for Huddersfield, not in necessarily the result, but the manner in which they play. They can't. I don't think they can. What would they do if they got another huge beating? What would the senior management do?
But we go back to this, and this is always the question. So, say Wakefield fans say, "We've got to get rid of Mark Applegarth." Right? Well, I would say, "Well, what's the point?"
Yeah.
But who is out there? Well, the obvious answer you're going to tell me now is Justin Holbrook. But is Justin Holbrook going to jump straight from there to Huddersfield? Because why would you? It's not. It's not as if it's St Helens.
I think when you look at Wakefield this year, there was always effort. You know, I don't think anybody really thought that
they're just not good.
There wasn't anybody better than Mark Applegarth to run that team, and I thought he spoke in a way that I had absolute utmost respect for the job he was trying to do with the resources that he had available. I think it's a little bit the same with Andy Last at Cass. You know, he's inherited a team. He is started to get his way of the way he wants to play across. He will be in the market. You know, he's brought Craig Lingard on board. There's a couple of Championship players who are very highly rated going to Castleford next year. They will look and feel a little bit different. You can feel there's a little bit of momentum.
The fans are enjoying what the young players are doing, certainly on Fridays. Yeah, everyone likes to see young players come through.
I think the issue for Huddersfield, and we just talked about Hull, you know, where things got really bad, but nobody was really calling for Tony Smith's head because they knew that given the time, the plan was there. Adam Pearson got to the point where he couldn't keep changing things every time it went wrong on the field. There was a bigger picture. My only issue with Huddersfield, and again, it's nothing to do with whether Ian Watson is a good coach. I mean, he clearly is. That is indisputable. They looked like a group of players on Friday that were rabbits in headlights. And if they look like that again against Wigan, and then they've got to go to Catalan, somebody who pays the bills will be saying, do we need to make a change? What do we do about this? How? Not do we need to make a change necessarily with the coaching team, but what do we do to bring change? And I don't know.
And I don't mean to bring it back to Jake Connor again, because it's obviously not one player in one team. But it's interesting that Hull didn't seem to be too bothered about him leaving, and I know there are only 2 wins above Huddersfield in the table, but it's just fascinating how sometimes a player can be used as the pawn in this story.
I think the thing about the way Huddersfield have been playing under Ian Watson and what Jake Connor could bring to that team, it didn't seem like an easy mix. Because I think if you buy Jake Connor, you've got to play Jake Connor, and then the question becomes, right, okay, what position do you play him in? Do you see him as a full-back, in which case, all right, that's fine, Will Price is going to Newcastle. Yeah. But what do you do with Tuilola here, who you've said consistently is your best fullback? If you're going to play him at standoff, what does that say about Ollie Russell, who you say you want to play alongside Theo Fudge? What does it say potentially about Isan Masters? Has he been signed as a centre, or is he your standoff? It's really interesting that mix when he signed. We all said, how is that actually going to work? And I'm sure that isn't the reason why they're where they are on the league table, but it might be a reason as to what the issue is behind the scenes, that there's an uncertainty about what they are and who they are and how they play.
It's the Graham Onions effect, this is what I call it. When Graham Onions wasn't in the England test team in 10 years ago, whatever, everyone would call for him to be in the England test team. And when he was in the team, he didn't do anything bad, but he just thought, he's just a player. And Jake Connor's now that when he's not in the team, why is he not in the team? When he's in the team, what's his role in the team? It's like something they didn't necessarily need to make. And if they didn't have Jake Connor now, would they be any further forward or backwards? Well, we don't know, do we? Because we're just speculating. But
I think again, Huddersfield fans have been saying it's the replacement for Danny Levy, who was so dynamic at a dummy half, and that's not to decry Nathan Peach. He's just a very different type of player, and I think it looks now as though Levy is being missed more than Connor's coming.
The point where I close the paper and go, I didn't know Rob Burrow was the coach of Leeds Rhinos. Rob's Rhinos on the rampage. He's taking over. He can do everything. Ian has mentioned great tribute to Ben Heaton at a Halifax game. I'm sure the workers Rugby League does do things well when it has to. And
terribly tragic.
And it's a year since Harry Gresham died, I noticed at the weekend, and as he would say, enjoy your Rugby League. We will, and we will see you again next week.